you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome to Visiting the Village. My name is Paul Kilduff Taylor and joining me as ever is the bountiful Ian Hardingham.
Hello everyone, I've just been to the dentist, which has prepared me very well for this podcast.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's The Top Story.
10 years after the release of Half-Life 2 Episode 1 and almost 9 years after the release of Episode 2, there's still no indication that Valve will ever release a conclusion. Ian Hardingham, what are your thoughts on the Half-Life debacle?
Well, that makes me feel pretty old. I never really liked Episode 1 very much. I did actually like Episode 2 quite a lot. Episode 1 had a bit too many weird underground sequences. Episode 2 felt a lot like a Half-Life game to me. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm sad like everyone else that Episode 3 hasn't arrived yet, or, Half-Life 3. I guess these are two separate issues. I suppose they're separate issues, maybe not. I think Valve's just been busy being successful with other things. They created Portal. I always really hoped that Portal 2 would have some really cool segue to Half-Life Episode 3 or Half-Life 3 at the end of it, and it didn't. Will they ever do it? Yeah, I reckon they'll do it, but it might be another 10 years.
Yeah, I feel like it's just so interesting. It really does reflect all the changes in games that have happened over that time. The fact that it absolutely doesn't make any sense for them to do it. It's just such a huge risk, and I would be really interested to see all of the sort of abortive attempts in different eras to do Half-Life 3, which must have happened. There must be something somewhere, there's some core of work that's been done on it. I'd like to know what that is. I mean, I'm not the world's greatest fan of Valve's games. I mean, Portal is amazing. I haven't played Portal 2, which I should do. I'm not a Dota fan. So for me, this isn't sort of the most exciting game that could ever have been made. But I guess for some people it is.
I've always thought that it would make the most sense for them to use Half-Life 3 to launch a new platform. When they first announced the Steam machines, I thought that would be amazing. If they were really going all in on a Linux-based console, if they were actually going to try and compete in the console market. Half-Life 3 being a launch title would be, it'd be up there with Halo and with Mario World as being one of the all-time great launch titles.
Yeah.
And then when VR came around, I thought, again, this makes a lot of sense. I think that it didn't happen on either of those platforms for different reasons. I think VR happened too quickly. They certainly didn't have time to make a great Half-Life game in the time that they needed to get the Vive to market, and they just never went all in on the console thing. They're successful in so many different ways, and they've got so many different irons in the fire. I think that they just don't want the stress of it right now. They'd rather make Portal 3, which I think they would view as being less a complicated proposition.
Yeah.
I've always thought that Half-Life 3 would need to have a new kind of technology that was based on. We had the physics gun and physics in general in Half-Life 2, and Half-Life 1, I guess it's about the storytelling and about the way that it was one continuous adventure, but it felt extremely disruptive and new at the time. It feels like if Half-Life 3 isn't based on something very big, then it's going to be a disappointment. And that's why I thought that VR in some ways might be the easy way out for them. If they spend 2 years trying really hard to make the definitive VR first-person shooter with Half-Life 3, it doesn't even really matter if people don't end up sort of buying into it very much, because at least they're trying something properly new.
Right, I completely agree. That since Half-Life 2, they have really, I guess, I don't really count the episodes. I mean, I think that was just a very much of its time experiment. Like, I don't think the episodes really relate to Half-Life 3 particularly that much. So you're right. It has to be based on some big revolutionary thing. I was thinking about sort of these other franchises, like for some reason I was thinking about The Witcher, which is something that they created to try and take on existing stuff in this genre, which is sort of a bit like Half-Life 1 in some ways.
Sure.
It had that sort of rebellious, like, we can do this and we're going to put our own spin on it, it's going to be better thing to it. And because Half-Life 2 really sort of took that in a different direction. It was about like, hey, this is this new tech that nobody's ever had before in this very cinematic sort of world. They can't do the same thing with The Witcher. They can just keep making it bigger and better and like expanding on the core stuff that people like. They're so good, CG Projekt, at that, like identifying what their fans like, the general things which are good, and doing that. But Valve don't have the same ethos there, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that the Half-Life 2 episodes were just, clearly they wanted to make more things of Half-Life. They didn't want all the expectations of putting a 3 on the end.
Yeah.
And that made sense, and we're all glad that it did happen, because actually Half-Life 2 Episode 2 was quite dense in lore. Half-Life has always taken a very Lost approach to lore, which is Lost creators have famously said that they wanted to ask more questions in every episode than they answered. And that's totally what Half-Life, for me, has done. But Half-Life 2 had at least quite a lot of questions answered, as well as asking a load more. I don't think there's much else to say about this. We all hope it's going to happen. I, for one, still really want Portal to become Half-Life 3 somehow. They've got plenty of links in the lore, and I think that would be just a fantastic reveal. And trying to get the Portal sort of mechanics as part of the Half-Life stuff would work. It's vaguely reminiscent to me of Dishonored, which I saw you talking a lot about on Twitter last week.
Yeah.
Of course, we all want it to happen, and hopefully it does.
I feel like with these kind of franchises, you have to really strike while the iron is hot, and again, The Witcher. And yeah, Dishonored, like, I think probably it's been a little bit too long since Dishonored came out for them to do Dishonored 2. I mean, I know they did some good DLC, which was kind of episodic in some ways, and also a bit reminiscent of Half-Life. They did sort of their own opposing force type thing where you're playing the bad guy character. So I feel like that's a good example where, the tech is still relevant. People want that game because it had a really interesting sort of spread of mechanics and a really interesting world and story. That's good enough. And I think there probably was a window for Valve to do a good Half-Life 3. But at the time, it was just sort of too risky compared to the other things they were doing, I guess.
Yeah, just to close this out, I think they've basically got two options. They can either just accept that it's not going to be some massive groundbreaking event and just make a great game, maybe involving Portal in some cool way, or I think they do it for VR, and I just don't think there's any other option right now.
I really would like to see them do the great game thing and just go like, we're going to make a single player game again, and it's going to be really good. I think that could work, actually. I mean, to get to the point where, as a company, you're only interested in sort of Dota-sized success, I feel like that really is leaving money on the table in terms of, like, there's still a space for this stuff.
Well, there's no question of leaving money on the table. I hope that if they do that they do something interesting structurally.
Yeah.
I think they clearly need to get out of the same ballpark as all of the other FPSs somehow, and maybe it's not with some brand new tech. Maybe they find something structural, like Portal. For all about its central mechanic, it's also very much about how it is structurally created that makes it so different.
Yeah, and one of the other things, sorry to go on about this, we will end soon. One of the other things I think they did in Half-Life and Half-Life 2 is AI. And I feel like there's a lot of stuff with AI that you could do now that could potentially be a bit more interesting, have different types of enemies and so on. There are some things there that they could do that would be light iteration that could make a really amazing game. So I would like
they
to
could try to pursue some different avenues. I think AI specifically is always a really dangerous place for a first-person shooter, and this really brings us on to Doom, where people really love the new Doom, and it's kind of about getting away from all the frills of modern stuff. And the more intelligent your enemies, in a lot of ways, that removes quite a lot of the cool gameplay that happens. That can be a bit risky. I mean, everyone remembers the mercenaries, or the the main bad guys in Half-Life 1 as being really good in terms of their AI, but what they were doing was extremely simplistic, and it was more about presenting this really interesting concept for how they were doing teamwork and retreating and throwing grenades.
Yeah.
But actually, they weren't particularly intelligent. But
yeah,
you know
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. That's kind of what I mean. It's like, it doesn't have to be, quote unquote, better AI or use a different AI paradigm. It can just be interesting AI. And yeah, you're right. Doom is a good reflection of that. So let's move on to talking about Doom in a smoother segue than usual. Christian Donlan has lots of praise for the characterization of the player character in Doom. In an article for Eurogamer, he writes about how expressive the character's animations are, despite only showing one or occasionally two arms. Now, I really like this article. It's called "The Guy You're Playing As in Doom is Playing Doom," and it's basically about kind of harmony between how the player is approaching things and how the character is approaching things, which is always something I like. So do you think that is an important part of a character in a game, or can you have dissonance and it doesn't really matter that much?
I think this is a really fun article. It's a really nice little think piece, and I like the idea that the animations for you picking up a new weapon are sort of really impatient and just like ripping off the wrapping paper on Christmas Day morning, and that's just how you're playing the game. And I think that's nice.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, just the core idea of having these sort of nonsense animations for your supposed character doing things in an FPS really turns me off. I think it tends to be done in a way which takes me out of the game, not puts me in it. I think one of the things that's really immersive about a first-person shooter is how you're just this gun, and you can put a lot of yourself into it. And when you have like these really detailed, really sort of physics-accurate animations of a guy forcing open lift doors with his hands, that actually makes me feel less immersed, not more. And I'm yet to play Doom. I've bought it, and I'm waiting to play it on Steam when I get a chance. And I know that you're sort of got a lot of problems with the way that they use animations that take you out of the game, despite the fact that everyone is talking about how the core system of basically trying to get you to do as many melee skills as possible is really cool and brings it back to having a flow like old Doom. Again, that sort of over-reliance on animation really turns me off.
Yeah, it is a really interesting kind of split here, because yes, you have the amazing little kind of animations, and also, as you quite rightly say, there's a thing in games where the more direct the control is, the fewer frames the animation has. So in this, the pickup's sort of instant, and it really feels quite almost glitchy, which is kind of what you want, really. And then you have the melee thing, which locks you into these very boring sort of Mortal Kombat-y animations, which are, even though they are quick, and people who are keen to defend this stuff will point out how quick they are, but they still take you way out of the action, exactly as you're saying. You're not directly in control of the character. So there is a bit of a conflict here. But, I mean, stuff like when, a screen or whatever is delivering you some lore and the guy just smashes it, which is the sort of example everyone's giving here, that's brilliant, because that is what you want to do as a player.
Yeah, I think that's really nice in jokes. And, I've been thinking recently, when people start making games, people who love games start making games, you're always so tempted to put in fun Easter eggs and do a lot of referentiality. And really, you kind of have to earn that. You have to make a great game first before any of your little references make any sense. And it's very rare that someone can make a great piece of art trucking mostly in referentiality. In fact, in some ways, Quentin Tarantino is one of the only people I can think of that really nails that. And Doom obviously has such a history, and making references is cool. But again, I'm just not totally sure that this is authentic enough for me to buy into. It's not a lot of the same people who are making it. It doesn't feel like it's the same artist to me, and if you have an IP that's 20 years old and it's being resurrected at basically a new company under a new publisher, I'm just not sure I'm respecting their authority to undermine gaming lore like that.
Right. Well, there's some interesting things there. I mean, the smashing of the screen, I don't see that necessarily as a sort of as an in-joke completely. It gives you some lore, there is lore.
No, sure, and I do like that, to be fair.
Right, so it's kind of actually just a method of delivering that's a bit better. In terms of other stuff, I think that people's relationship to references and metatextuality and things is very defined by sort of the era in which they live and what cultural stuff they like. I mean, I completely disagree that it's sort of rare and or impossible for something that's mostly referential to be good.
Oh no, yeah, sorry,
it's just
not impossible.
done
But
badly a lot of the time. And also, one of the things that really struck me about Undertale is how much it relies on that. Like, it's, I think, Undertale is not a well-designed video game by any of the metrics that you could use, to describe that, and yet it's filled with all of this stuff, internal references and external, that people really like. So using that as the entire basis for something has been done, I guess.
yeah, no, sure, but I mean, I think that as a genre, I wasn't talking about the genre of things which are parodies or references within themselves. I should have been more clear on that. I think that if you're setting out to make something new and sort of generally straight faced, people spend a lot of time thinking about how their thing will fit into the cultural canon and how they can extend the references that have been going back in time, when in order for you to be even relevant to the cultural canon, you have to make something good as well. But that is definitely, I'm talking about separate from, I mean, I know Undertale isn't a parody exactly, but it's kind of the predominant sort of genre that it's in.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. I mean, just to wrap this up, I think the conflict in the new Doom is really interesting to me. That it wants to be this old school thing, but also it has this very console-y feel to it. It sort of feels like it's a bit self-consciously retro. It feels like it's, for kids who grew up after the original Doom came out, to me. But people have very varied opinions on it, and I'm certainly in the minority with my thoughts.
Yeah, I've got to play it so I can bring my own authentic opinion to the table.
Esports player Fallen has released a letter explaining why his team backed out of a contract to move from Luminosity to SK. This is a very involved story, and I think what we should do is probably take a more general approach to it. Do you feel like esports needs tighter regulation to stop this kind of shenanigans, or are these shenanigans sort of in line with what you see in mainstream sports?
Well, I think they're in line with what you see in lower income mainstream sports. When I hear about the stuff that happens in lower division soccer in this country, it's exactly the same as the stuff that's going on here. Dodgy dealings, owners looking for tax breaks in weird ways, and just generally screwing talent over, all that kind of stuff. It seems to be completely normal in that slightly Wild West world. I think that, it's kind of the same bell we keep ringing. If this gets a lot bigger, then it will just necessarily get a lot more legitimized, and people will be able to afford lawyers to represent them, and stuff like this won't happen. There'll be some precedents to look back on how you can behave. Leagues will start to create really specific rules. I think that we're still just in this massive Wild West mess where you've got leagues competing with each other. Loads of companies trying to get into the market and do something completely different. The power structure has not been defined yet for me, and I feel like we're just in the middle of the process of just a generally organic process of legitimacy that will just come through all of this.
So a few years ago, there was sort of a lot of buzz around agencies in esports. Agencies for talent, for casters, and also agencies for players. And looking at what esports players and teams are like, there is just such a massive need for that. I'm not a fan of an agent model in a lot of situations. I think that generally in the world that we're in, if you're a creative person or if you do something very specific, you also have to be reasonably entrepreneurial yourself and reasonably aware, certainly, of legal issues. Otherwise, you're likely to get into a lot of really terrible situations. So I kind of feel that it's someone's responsibility to do those things. However, esports is something that requires an unbelievable amount of dedication to perform at even a sort of basic professional level. And a lot of these players are very, very young. So I do think you need reputable agencies who are going to do fair deals for these players to sort all this stuff out. They're not going to be competent to do it on their own.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Definitely should get agencies. That'll be easier to make work when there's more money involved. Obviously, there are a huge number of agents in the world showing how it's generally done. I think in the US, it's traditional for them to take about a 3% cut
Right.
for really big professional athletes, that kind of thing. So there's plenty of precedence in terms of working out how this stuff should work. Really interesting story that happened this year when a new NFL draftee decided to represent himself in contract negotiations, and obviously angered all of the agents a lot. And he got like very, 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 very mildly screwed over by the team, which all the agents were really happy about.
Yes.
You know, you're right. These guys are probably not going to be fantastic esports players and good at business in general. That's just, those two things are not going to be on the same side of the coin for 75% of these guys, and there's no problem with getting an agent. You should get an agent, but obviously a lot of these guys are not making enough money to get an agent.
Right, and knowing, you know, who a reputable agent is, that's very difficult. I mean, that's kind of, that stuff is hard for me because, as I said, I come from a background of seeing a lot of people who really should just have a little bit of basic awareness of what they're doing outside the, you know, the sole reason they're there, be it gaming or music or whatever. And I'm often very critical of that, and I'm often kind of, you know, will encourage people to just read something themselves or think about it themselves, spend some time on it themselves. But with this, you just can't. Like, there's no expectation. It takes such a particular personality to do well at esports. I think in a way that's different from sports. I know a lot of professional athletes can, you know, they manage to get in their academic career sort of to some extent around, you know, their sporting stuff, and I guess they're at college age by the time they have to start taking it seriously, so they're a bit more mature.
Well, maybe, but they make plenty of mistakes themselves. I think that, I wonder, you know, people get taken advantage of in these kind of places. It reminds me how every single teen sitcom ever has an episode where one of the female characters gets signed up to some bogus modelling agency, and it turns out to be just this massive sort of...
What are you talking about?
this massive... They're just being taken advantage of. And, you know, we might get into a situation where there's enough money involved that the unscrupulous agents start targeting 14-year-old esports up-and-comers, get them onto bad contracts, and they get, taken advantage of that way. They get exploited. The exploiters get exploited like that. And that's something you have to pay attention to as well. So agents can be bad, as you say. But we're not anywhere close to this stuff stopping happening, that's for sure.
Your book about life lessons drawn from mid to late 90s American teen drama is something I await with bated breath. Oculus have released a software update which blocks a hack used to enable Vive owners to play Oculus exclusive games on the Vive. In response, the hack developers released their own update which re-enables Vive support by completely disabling all DRM. Now, do you feel Oculus kind of reneged on their promise here? Or is this a legitimate thing they need to clamp down on?
You're going to have to remind me, what promise was involved with this from Oculus?
Sorry. So, yes, at one point, Palmer Luckey did say that they wouldn't have DRM and that they would allow the use on other platforms. I can look up the exact quote.
I think this is pretty interesting. This is a problem because, in general, I think it's fair to say that you have a lot of people who are who don't pirate games. They feel that pirating games is wrong, or they don't do it. So in general, this whole selling games things works because there are enough people buying games and they just don't generally want to go to piracy for whatever reasons, even if piracy is relatively easy. I think the reason that this specifically has become a problem is that those people who are perfectly sort of ethical games buyers and players don't think there's anything wrong with running a hack so that they can play their Oculus game on the Vive. That's something that I might do if I only had one of those things and I really wanted to play a game that was on the platform. People are just generally not going to view that as sort of unethical, which is why the platforms have to respond in a different way. in terms of, there's so much stuff to look at here. Obviously, Oculus wants to succeed against Vive. Obviously, they've paid money to get their exclusives, and they don't want Vive to be able to play them. Obviously, they're trying to have a fight against a world full of incredibly talented hackers who are probably going to win.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Oculus, the best thing they can do is sort of open their arms and say, we embrace everything and play the good guy card. If they're going to continue being in low-level warfare with the hackers, that doesn't seem like a great situation to be in. Is it going to have an impact on their sales? Are people going to be like going to Vive because Vive can play both? Then Oculus needs to start encouraging their own hackers to enable Vive games to be played on the Oculus, I guess.
Need a hacker war. So the quote from Palmer Luckey was on Reddit, and he said, "If customers buy a game from us, I don't care if they mod it to run on whatever they want. Our goal is not to profit by locking people to only our hardware." I mean, that's fairly explicit. Like, this is an about face by them on that, really, I think.
Yeah, I think it is an about face. I don't think it's the first.
No,
and I think they've understood that they are actually in a hardware battle, and they need to sell hardware, and they need exclusives to sell hardware, and they're not going to make very much money selling VR software on its own. I maybe that's a bit too complicated to say that, but that's not the business they want to be in right now, trying to make money off VR games. They want to make money off VR headsets.
Right, they need to get this install base going to even have a hope of that being sensible. I agree with you. So this is really weird. I think both parties here, I mean, Valve are kind of just happy they made something cool at this point. That's going to be their situation. Oculus, I think, really would like their headset to be a console. Everything they've done, they built this bespoke store thing, they've signed up exclusives, they've tried to have this strong branding, everything. Like, they kind of just wish it was a console. And I feel like they don't really... There's going to be some tension, as you can see from this sort of conflicting messages, because it's not a console, it's a PC peripheral. And that means that you're in the PC world, and you have to just accept that stuff like this is going to happen. You cannot control it. It's not possible. Everyone who's tried has failed, and they've usually alienated their customers in the past. So I think that absolutely the right play for them is to just go, yeah, cool, okay, whatever. You do whatever. You need to install this mod or whatever to run it on the Vive, then it's your problem, your liability. Things may not work with the mods, they may not work very well. Come to Oculus, where you have the beautiful store and everything works perfectly and our hardware is the best. That needs to be the value proposition.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. They've basically been gazumped in a pretty bad way by Vive.
Yeah.
They're kind of lucky in a lot of ways that Vive is a significantly more hardcore platform, that there actually is differentiation. Because while, I mean, they're in a bad situation because most people will tell you the Vive experience is much better, but Vive is also harder to set up, requires a bigger room, is more complicated. So at least there is some product differentiation, because in general they're in trouble. They've lost their first mover advantage. Valve decided to get into the fray and did it very effectively, which is a terrible situation to be in. And I, if I'm the guys who sold Oculus to Facebook, I'm extremely glad right now that I sold it, to be honest.
Also, they've dropped the ball on this room scale stuff. Like, they did that press release, which is like, well, we can do room scale too, and you just need this peripheral and blah, blah. That's not how you address that. Like, you have to be really... You have to come out and say, our room scale is like this, and here's the really good room scale game running on it, and here's how much it's going to cost, and this is why it's better than Vive. You have to attack when, you're behind, and they absolutely haven't done that. So I think very few people actually know that it's capable of doing the room scale stuff still.
Yeah, Sony have this big paradigm motto thing. They say they want to do things first, or they want to do things best.
Yeah.
And Oculus managed to do neither, basically.
Yeah.
They didn't manage to be particularly first with the full release, and they don't appear to have done it best either. They do, as you were alluding to, apparently have kind of a really cool storefront and a bunch of games that are sort of more suitable to just sort of playing around with. I from all the reviews I read, it's a very much different proposition of what you're playing with when you get an Oculus, when you get a Vive. But in general, I just I'm getting massive VHS Betamax vibes here. I just think the Oculus is in real trouble. I wonder, the question I have most is for Valve, and to what extent they are going to support the Vive. Because I think that while VR has arrived in a more meaningful way than it ever has before, I think it's going to have a difficult time. Most people I've seen who've got really excited about VR have talked openly about how there's a real kind of loss of interest in it shortly after like the massive high of being obsessed with it.
Yeah.
And I think that getting people through that and trying to work out what products are going to keep people playing with their VR for much longer, I think that's what Valve needs to really commit to if they're going to keep up this success.
I agree, and I think I've started to see some of that happening. I was talking to a friend of the company, Cliff Harris, who's had his lovely room dedicated Vive set up for a while. He's very into the Vive, and he's saying that he's starting to find things like people developing RPGs. Like there's quite a viable, simple but viable 3D RPG that you play with the Vive. And he said like when you're hitting these low level bad guys, like you just would never imagine playing like a Bethesda game again. He said the experience of just going through loads of skeletons and killing them, which is so core to that being good in an RPG experience, is so good, with the Vive. It's so compelling. So I think people are already starting to, feel like this is something that's going to keep you coming back. If you can get that kind of compelling gameplay in there, as well as the novelty factor, then it's going to work. I agree, and I think Valve are really well positioned for that. I think Oculus are just caught in the middle. They don't have the super easy to use thing, which is going to be PlayStation VR. I think when that comes out, combined with the Neo, that's going to be a really interesting thing to see. A bit more beef in the console with a nice, easy to use, very slick Sony product. That's probably going to be the first one of these I get, because I don't have time for the Vive. So they're just not they don't have the distinctive proposition now.
Yeah, exactly. That's the closed book on this. We need to see something very big coming out of Oculus before I'm starting to buy their stock again.
Keith Stewart wrote an article for Eurogamer about his time as editor of the official Dreamcast magazine. During his tenure, he managed to get blacklisted by Sega Europe by inadvertently releasing a cover disc, which allegedly made playing pirated games incredibly easy. A window into a different time, Ian Hardingham.
This is a pretty amazing story. I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but Keith Stewart's kind of like the biggest games journalist in the UK nowadays, or certainly one of the very top guys. He's managed to get a lot of really cool articles about old stuff and new stuff. He's obviously editor of games at The Guardian, which is quite a big deal because The Guardian is like a real publication. He's an awesome guy in real life. I'm just sort of reading this article. I just want to start out by saying there's a bit of a correction in that Keith has said that his memory may have been playing tricks on him, that the disc in question definitely did just bypass region locking. And I'm not. He says he's not sure that it allowed him to run pirated games, but the story is still good and it's still worth talking about. Can you imagine, like, running a Dreamcast magazine and having a CD on the front that destroyed the region locking for any console that ran it, and really relying on the console manufacturer to send you review code and new games and data and stuff? I just can't, you're just in so much trouble at that point.
That's basically the worst thing that could possibly happen. I mean, I've heard stories of actual pirated software being on the cover disc, which I think is possibly worse than this, but maybe not, because region locking was such a critical part of that era of consoles. I mean, it was absolutely key to the sales strategy of them, and obviously Dreamcast was somewhat troubled in various respects. I mean, just the whole politics of running an official magazine anyway, which he goes into, are just absolutely incredible now, and sort of something that I don't think we'll see again, really. That you're ostensibly being critical, but you're entirely beholden to this one company for everything. So you have to maintain some credibility, while still being interesting. Extremely hard.
I think one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about the whole region locking issue, people who haven't seen the inner workings of these crazy console companies, is that the three different territories, Asia, Europe, and America, they tend to basically be different companies that are often competing with each other and certainly not sort of constantly cooperating to the extent that you imagine.
No.
And that's one of the real complexities and one of the reasons why the region locking thing was a big deal. It was really important to these companies. I think that it's easy to be too critical of the relationship between a console magazine back in the day and the console manufacturer. I think a lot of people want the journalism around games to be sort of, completely separate. And I totally understand all the reasons for that. But, what are you going to do? I mean, these guys are running this platform. They want to connect with their fans in different ways. They're going to be giving you a lot of content. And they're going to want to be able to send the kinds of messages that they want to send. I think there is a line that you can walk, which doesn't involve giving 95% to a bad game. That allows you to kind of make both parties happy. If you're really a fan of a console, you're a fan of that console's manufacturer, and that means that you want to be hearing the messages that they have to give you.
Yeah, and fan is a good term. This is going to be a fan publication where they're going to talk some stuff up. I mean, I think it's difficult. What people don't understand, and what really irritates me about some of the recent stuff, is that the journalists at this time who were doing that, who were running these magazines, which surely would be the sort of bastion of the absolute worst kind of thing that people are complaining about, they were working really hard to try and be objective, they were the ones bringing the objectivity in there. They weren't sort of selling out to the big corporations. That was happening at the publishing level. So even in this, the supposedly worst situation, the journalists were going to be the ones trying to be fair and give an accurate representation of stuff.
Absolutely. One of the sort of the side points of this story is that cover discs and cover CDs and cover discs were what sold magazines back then.
Yeah.
It was great for Amiga magazines because they were able to just chuck a couple of floppies on there with some weird sort of proto-freeware. It was much harder for, obviously Nintendo magazines couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
And I think it was, an important part of PlayStation 1's success was that they were able to put demos on a disc again. Obviously, this is a new age now with the internet and no one cares about this kind of thing anymore, but I certainly remember how exciting a really good cover disc could be.
Oh, it's important to actually remind yourself about what things were like, and it's independent from nostalgia, just so that you can take a bit of an analytical look at how things have changed. Like, it was hard to get a new game to play. Getting a new game to play involved going to the shops and buying one, borrowing one from your mate, or renting one at Blockbuster, or a cover disc, and that those were the only ways that you could get games. Or piracy, I guess. But it's just incredible to think about that now. So yeah, the value in these things was absolutely huge, and they often had stuff that you couldn't get anywhere else. They'd have demos, they'd have weird stuff. And that was just so incredibly amazing. It's so easy to now just go, like, in a second I can go and find some crazy novelty thing or some strange experimental game I've never seen before. These would be your only chances of getting those back then.
Yeah, it is real sort of nostalgia looking back. It is always better to have all this choice and everything now, but there's not much that's more awesome than not having a choice and happening to get something good without a choice, like just finding really crazy stuff on a demo disc. I used to collect all of my PC Gamer and PC Format cover discs. I had like hundreds and hundreds of them. Yep. And I did occasionally go back and load up a demo disc from 5 years ago and see what crazy stuff was on there, and that was a fun time. But the internet has destroyed it.
The internet ends fun. Recent rumours about a new Xbox have begun to emerge. Apparently the machine will be around 4 times more powerful than the current Xbox and is due to launch towards the end of next year. It is also said to be completely backwards compatible with the current Xbox. Does this blow all that recent stuff about console parity out of the water for you?
Yeah, here we go. This is the biggest story of this week. This probably should have been the lead story, to be honest. I know these are rumours, and we have no idea, but I think this is starting to tell a story that we need to listen to. Mm-hmm. As I said on this very air a few weeks ago, Microsoft's not going to let their console be less powerful than PlayStation again. That's the one thing that's definitely not going to happen.
Yeah.
And from the stuff that's leaking out, I reckon that they are preparing to compromise on the original Xbox One being able to play everything. I just think that's where this is going. I think they're saying, we are going to make a console that is significantly more powerful than PS4, and we are not going to require our developers to make all of their games backwards compatible. That is where I think this is going.
Right. I mean, that's an interesting play, and it makes sense. And I think it's a good play for the market because Sony they're in an interesting position right now where they have all this traction and they kind of, it feels to me like not quite sure how to capitalize on it. I think a lot is going on behind the scenes on PSVR. And obviously, you know, we have to be circumspect about this because there's nothing sort of internal that we can reveal about that sort of development stuff. But being circumspect about it, from the publicly available information, it would seem that there's a lot going on with PlayStation VR. And this is just a really nice move. This is great for everyone. Like, I think it makes sense for Microsoft. I think it will challenge Sony in an interesting way, and I think it's good for customers. I just really like this.
I wonder if Xbox is in a bad enough situation that this is basically what they have to do. So I can buy that. I'm concerned that they may be cutting their profit margins very low on the hardware. Mm-hmm. At this stage in a console's life cycle, this is the stage where console manufacturers expect to start making big profits on hardware. Usually they'll launch at either selling at a loss or at a very small profit, and then a couple of years in, they've managed to make a version of the console they're making a lot more money on. So, you know, it's Microsoft, they have all the money in the world, but I certainly think that they may be making the decision to spend money to try and sort of belatedly win this generation. Sure, it is good. It's probably good for consumers. I mean, I'm just kind of work out what the landscape is going to look like. You know, people are not going to start making games just for Xbox One, I don't believe. You know, they're still going to need to hit PS4 and Xbox. I guess I just sort of emotionally wonder whether this is going to work. I'm slightly dubious that they're not too late, and that maybe they would be better off just playing for the next generation. But that's just a feeling.
I think they're trying to do something which is independent of sort of generations of consoles. I think they're trying to say, look, okay, well, we had some limited success, but yes, we probably didn't win. So what can we do to disrupt it? And as a play to disrupt everything, I just think it's great. Like, it's going to be really interesting. It's going to offer an alternative. Yeah, I guess making games, you know, cross-platform with this, and I suppose you'll have to support original PS4 even sort of when this is really going. That will be a challenge, so that may not be ideal for everyone, and it may result in some stuff being exclusive again, which I suppose is bad for consumers generally. But just from a disruption point of view, I think we've had a status quo for a while now, and it's good. It's good to be disruptive.
Sure, we're going to watch continued news about this with great interest. I'm not going to, but you know, I don't care how many times they promise backwards compatibility. I don't care that they're going to break that without a doubt.
Yeah, cool. Unity have announced some changes to the pricing model for their fabled engine. The free tier is more or less unaffected, but the professional tier will go up in price from $75 a month to $125 a month with a 12-month minimum commitment. You'll no longer need to buy the separate iOS and Android packages at $75 a month each, however. They've also created a plus tier, which is $35 a month and will allow you to use the dark theme in the editor. This is producer Jimmy's hobby horse of the week. Shout out to producer Jimmy. He was very keen to point out that this enables you to use the dark theme in the editor, along with a few extra cloud features. What do you make of this?
This is pretty interesting to me, I have to say. You know, you're talking about... I think basically if you're making games to the extent that we are, you need to have the professional tier.
Yep.
You're talking about the cost of the engine going up from, something like 600-ish quid to like 1,100 quid a year, which is quite a lot.
That is a lot.
You know, that's starting to be a problematic amount of money for me.
Yep.
I you know, if games take 2 or 3 years to make, which a lot of games do, that's a lot of money. I mean, it's a subscription, which it helps in some ways and hinders in others.
Yeah.
I would probably need to look a bit deeper to understand like how this affects your ability to maintain your game. Like if you want to release a patch for a game that you've released a year ago, do you have to re-up at that point?
Yeah,
Are you
you
able to
probably
go
do.
back to your code base? I think you probably are in some ways. I the thing that's I'm really most surprised by this, because this feels a bit like Unity declaring victory.
Yes.
And I that's a very interesting thing for me.
So I don't know how this compares to Unreal. That's the information that would
Unreal
have
is
been good to have.
free, but will take 5% of your
Oh, that's right.
first $100,000 or something, or something like
Okay.
that. It's a small percentage nowadays,
Well, that's pretty good. Yeah.
and it's full source.
Yeah. I mean,
maybe that's
intriguing. Okay, this is really intriguing. I totally agree with what you just said about them declaring victory. I think this is what you do when you're in that position. It feels a bit to me like, I find it fascinating that Valve have never really changed their revenue agreement with developers. I find that quite fascinating because they could have done that, and they've just stuck to their guns really, really hard on that. As effectively a goodwill gesture, because that is the thing that obviously affects, loads and loads and loads of people's careers and lives and businesses and everything. So they've stuck on that, and this is like, it's definitely not as big a deal as that by any order of magnitude. But it's kind of like that. It's a lot of people need to use this engine, then they can't go anywhere else, and they're very heavily invested in it. So putting the price up is an aggressive move that is just directly bad for their customer base, but they're kind of saying, we're going to do this and we can't stop you. That's a weird thing to say to your customers, but it's probably going to massively increase their revenue because I think everyone's going to pay this.
Yeah, I'm having a quick look at what you get with the personal and professional versions of Unity, and sorry, I was wrong. UDK does not come with full source.
Okay. Yeah.
I think looking at this, I think maybe their deal is that they reckon it is possible to release a game just using the personal edition.
Yeah.
Although don't know what the team license is. Sorry for this bad. Yeah. Okay.
Research.
We'll see to do with that. I'll canvass some opinions on just how reasonable it is to use just the personal edition.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be important for us making decisions going forward as well. And they do charge you extra for the console editions as well. I mean, they really would like you to pay sort of $10,000 to get your game released on all platforms. That's what they'd like.
Yeah.
And now I'm just kind of intrigued because I'm starting to wonder whether this is going to really start moving back up engine prices, because this takes me back to GDC a year and a half ago where everyone went free.
Yes.
And now they're bringing the money back in.
I wonder about this. Like, this definitely, the most cold business part of my soul says, okay, sure, you're in control now, do this. It's not enough that it's going to push a significant number of customers away. It's probably just straightforwardly makes sense. Do it now, get the money, reinvest, and so on. But I think it starts to open the door a little bit for Game Maker, a little bit for some of the sort of lower end stuff. Game Maker are very ambitious. There's a lot of really good high profile games that keep getting made with Game Maker. People still have this idea that, if you're making a simpler 2D game, that's what you should use. If you're starting out completely from scratch, then it's better. Those are still ideas which are very commonly held. And maybe instead of doing this, or as well as doing this, they could attack that a bit as well.
Yeah, Unity needs good competitors, and I think you're right about Game Maker Pro, and I think UDK's in the right kind of area.
Yeah.
Although I think they could do a bit better as well. We're looking at moving to Unity for our next game, and I couldn't be more lukewarm about it, feelings wise. There are lots of aspects of it that I find annoying as a programmer. I like having my fully sourced stuff that I have complete control over. You really do lose a lot of control to Unity, and that's necessarily so that they can enable it to be so accessible and have all of these different bits work together so well. They can keep up to date and have all the porting. What they're offering you is so killer, with that portability and the ability for especially artists to do so much on their own without any kind of code intervention. But the compromises you have to take are very real. So I really would like to see other people bring up great engines with twists on those compromises.
Yeah.
You know, for us, for our level, being able to publish to PlayStation 4 and Xbox One is just a huge deal.
Yeah.
And it's and not having that is starting to become untenable. But I certainly don't feel sort of butterflies in my tummy in a good way when I think about moving to this platform.
Unity is really great at a very important subset of things, and that's still going to be the killer feature of it, really. I mean, we don't sort of honk our own horn on this podcast too much, but Tokyo 42, which is a game that we talked about a lot that we're publishing, is the kind of thing that just wouldn't be possible without the existence of Unity. It really enables the kind of development that those guys do. I just don't think they could do it with other tools, to be honest. And that's where it really, really thrives. And I just wonder what the thinking is behind this. I feel like you can do this. I feel like you have a pass to do this, and it's okay as a business. But then you really have to look at your relationship with your customer base very hard right after you've done this. Because this is basically asking quite a big question of those customers and saying, you know, are you still with us if we do this? It is challenging that relationship. So just like any other relationship, you have to make sure, you have to check in and make sure that everything's okay and make sure if you need to do anything else to continue.
Absolutely.
Kotaku broke the news that No Man's Sky was to be slightly delayed, and in exchange they got threats and accusations of deceit. When the developer Hello Games confirmed the delay, apparently they also received death threats. Now, what do we think about the fact that people are so invested in this game that they're going to go around threatening people with death?
I'm not really into this very much. This happens. I mean, I was kind of imagining that they would be delayed by 6 months. It's like a month or 2 months. People get upset on the internet. It's definitely upsetting to those people involved. I just think it's a little bit unsavory. I don't think anyone's actually going to get shot. I think they should be kind of broadly happy they've managed to foster this level of passion. Beyond that, I just kind of want to ignore it.
Well, to me, it's interesting because I think people don't understand that this is good. Like, honestly, this is the best news about No Man's Sky that could possibly have come out at this point, I think. If you're looking across, like, everything they could do or announcing that they're spending more time on the game is surely a good thing. And although I understand why there's sort of knee-jerk anger reaction, I'm a little bit surprised that's not more prevalent.
I think there's a bit to unpack there. I definitely agree with your sentiments that a company spending longer within reason polishing and fixing a game is good, and users should be broadly happy about that. I think that there's nothing bad to be said about that. You know, this is a month and a half delay. I'm personally intrigued to know what exactly they can do in a month and a half. If I was actually looking forward to this game a lot, I'd probably be more comfortable if it was like a 3 or 4 month delay.
Yeah.
Being delayed this late brings up red flags to me as a developer just very slightly. But that's got nothing to do with the point you were making, which is that fans shouldn't really be pissed off about this. Fans should just be embracing them moving forward some stuff so they can make stuff better.
Right, and it really just shows up for me that the gulf between, you know, people's understanding of development and so on. Like, and there, I was talking to a long-term Twitter foil of mine and friend Louis Proctor about this, and his line was that he thought that it was irresponsible of them to allow this to be leaked. Because it was inevitably going to cause this problem. And I find that a very interesting point of view, because of course, like, that, assuming that there's going to be coordinated PR between a developer and a platform holder about a delay is effectively lunacy. Like, that's never going to happen. It's just impossible. So I just think you can't possibly blame Hello Games for almost anything here. they're having to fight against an enormous amount of pressure. Once you have this date set, and it's retail as well, which is absolutely killer, they have absolutely everything timed to that date, to then turn around and say, no, we're not happy. And this is the first time they've ever been in this situation with a big game like this. That takes a massive amount of guts. And the fact that, they've had almost no meaningful response, like positive response from their community, to me, is just crazy.
Yeah, I think that is a bit surprising. Louis P definitely has some strong opinions on the internet, a lot of which are fairly weird. Sure, yeah, I feel bad for these guys. They're definitely having a hard enough time as it is trying to finish this game without all this nonsense. But, I mean, this isn't their first rodeo either. I suppose they haven't had this kind of problem to deal with before, but, they're kind of vets at this point. They should understand that this is what happens at the very top levels. I mean, I'm more dubious. I'm worried about what's going to happen when people actually play this game. But if they've got that sorted out, if that's going to work out okay, then they're going to be absolutely fine.
Like I say, this just gives me confidence. I think they're very, very keen that people are happy with the game. I know that from talking to people who work there and work with them. Like they want a good public reaction from the game. That's the thing that they care about at this point, overwhelmingly. So I agree that a month isn't very long. I think, take 6 months, do it properly if you're going to take a delay. But we'll see what happens.
Well, I'm sure that's what they want. The image of the game that they have projected is a very clear image, and it's blazed into the minds of a huge number of game players. And a month and a half is certainly not going to make the difference about whether that is actually exists, whether that is the feeling that you have playing the game, the feeling that has been portrayed in the marketing. And if it is, then they are going to be in a fantastic situation, and that none of this is going to be remembered.
Yeah, they spent so much time in their last rounds of PR addressing that, like doing really in-depth, long video previews with sites, like really, trying to show exactly what the game is. They've really, really fought on that point. That's been their bugbear. Like, is it going to be like the video? Has been their absolute, like, an albatross for them for the whole of development. And that's what happens when you set these expectations with a big trailer. So, I commend them for trying that. I do think probably some people will be disappointed when it comes out, but the last thing that was kind of hyped in this way was The Witness, and that was, if not a slam dunk, then certainly a very significant success on release, and I just expect this to go the same way, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that the games presses definitely would rather sort of this worked out well with these games.
Yeah.
They want to find the positivity. For me, it's not The Witness, it's Stellaris.
Okay. Interesting.
But The Witness has probably more similarities. But Stellaris is more recent. People really liked The Witness. I do not expect the substance of the reaction to be the same, but the positivity may well be.
Alrighty. Starbreeze have bought back the rights to the Payday series from publisher 505 Games. Using a combination of stock and revenue share, the developer is able to reacquire the franchise for around $30 million. At the same time as this announcement, they also removed all microtransactions from Payday 2. Are we ever going to hear the end of the Payday 2 saga?
This is pretty interesting. So Starbreeze are valued at something like... they're valued at a lot. I think they're valued at over $300 million.
Yeah.
Now that's quite a lot. And by their own admission, this is all about Payday. Payday has contributed at least 90% of total revenue in any quarter for them.
Wow,
so they are
okay.
a one-game company.
Yes.
I'm just kind of, I'm just sort of interested by this whole thing. So the actual buyout of 505 Games' stake in the IP is sort of, for me, it seems to be moving money around, because basically in return for getting all of the IP to Payday, they've given Starbreeze an extra percentage in the company, which sort of in some ways seems broadly the same. They haven't just paid cash for this. They
Right.
basically paid stock for this.
Yeah.
And if the company is just all about payday, then, in some ways those two things are similar. I'm interested by this. I'm certainly not rushing to invest in a company who has one game, and that game is Payday. Payday is really popular. I wonder how long it can go on. Maybe a long time. I don't want to be like negative ninny today. What do you think about this?
I'm really in for that. Yeah, I didn't really realize that Payday was like this crazy. Yeah, hell, why wouldn't you put more microtransactions in that? And they're removing them now. So it's baffling to me the extent to which these franchises can just tempt people in on the investment side, because there's no guarantee it's going to go on forever. There's no guarantee that Payday 3 will happen and be good. It's just funny to see this war over this game that doesn't really get talked about that much outside, these business stories. There was some stuff around it. A few people played it, but it doesn't have the cultural impact of, say, an Overwatch or something in that tier where everyone talks about it all the time. It's sort of one of the almost stealth PC mega hits. Wanting to get it back this badly, I guess makes sense. As you say, it's kind of their everything. So fighting to get it back makes sense.
I'm not sure what the long game here is, because it just doesn't feel to me to be qualitatively a very much different situation. I think it may just give them a bit more control. They've basically gone from 505 owning a share of Payday to 505 owning a share of them, which I think possibly is a safer situation for them. But I don't want to get too bogged down in that. And the free-to-play thing is a really big red flag. They tried really hard to pivot into Payday 2 being like a long-term FTP success. As we talked about in the past, it obviously failed incredibly badly. It's all interesting. I think that Payday 3 will be a massive success. But there are some red flags here.
Paradox have come under a bit of fire lately for various racist mods that users have made for Stellaris. Do games with mod support have a duty to police the content of those mods?
To answer that question very straightforwardly, in my opinion, no, they do not. I think that they have a responsibility to police their forums to a certain extent, their own forums. I think they probably have a responsibility to police their Steam Workshop stuff, because that's kind of a part of their storefront. I actually kind of fairly offended, in a higher level than I usually am by anything we do on this show, by the position taken by a journalist called Chris Blatt that
Brat.
That Paradox
know.
Do I know him, do I?
Yes.
Well, hello, Chris. Sorry to criticize you. I'm still kind of offended by this. That Paradox should be, and I quote, leading the conversation on discriminatory mods. I think that all this stuff makes me really glad that the internet in general is free, and if people want to make stuff that is not socially acceptable, they can put it on the internet, and people can be rude about it or not link to it, but it still can be there, and it is not generally controlled. And I understand that Apple are going to control what's on their storefront. I definitely understand that Steam are going to control what's on their storefront. But in terms of finding a way to actually stop people making a mod for a game, I draw the line there. And I certainly draw the line before the developer is required to wade into all these incredibly complicated issues because someone's made a mod somewhere for their game.
Right, so there are some things here which I think are being confused. The Steam Workshop thing is absolutely critical because obviously the developer receives money from that, and also people are able to make money from it. Now, I don't know how realistic it is to say, oh, the developer should police their Steam Workshop content. We don't heavily use Steam Workshop, so I don't know how easy that is to do. Do you need a full-time team of moderators there looking at every submission to make sure that it's okay? Maybe you do. But I do think that's critical. I think it's critical what you make money from and what you associate your company with. I think that you need to have a set of standards for what people are able to do with your game. that are extremely broad and generalized and would exclude racism and hate speech is a category that's traditionally been easier to exempt from total freedom of speech than almost anything else. So I think that's kind of a no-brainer. You can publish standards that say, do not use our game content for this. And then you can go after people who do in specific instances. However, I definitely stop short of Chris's opinion as well here. I don't think it's their place to police everything. He says, your job is to make computer games, but it's also to ensure those computer games remain safe spaces to play. That, when you have a situation where anyone can change that space in any way, that just can't be true.
Absolutely. And as we've seen in the past, with laws that have been posited to deal with social media, making the social media companies responsible for the content on their platforms, that really does hurt our freedoms.
Yeah.
When you do not allow freedom of expression on these own platforms, I think you've put it very right. You've drawn the lines in the right places, exactly the same place as mine. I don't want to get too much into specifics. This specific mod, I think, makes all of the humans white and have European names or something.
Yeah.
Now, I've not got no interest in getting into the whys and wherefores. It is, however, it is a game about alien races, etc. So I think while that's probably over the line, and I guess possibly other things lead that to be sort of obviously racist, etc. Do I want to be a games developer trying to work out in my game of like 1,000 races what mod is racist?
Yeah.
Like, and do I want to just start banning everything that could be racist, which could also be like a really legitimate mod? And I really just don't want to hear. It's not my responsibility. And there's got to be a line somewhere where people are allowed to go and do things that are on the borderlines. Like,
well, yes.
That's got to be established. There are some things that right now all the people who get very up in arms about ethical stuff on the internet think is outrageously bad, that in 30 years we will accept as good or normal. There are things like that. We don't know what they are, but things move forward, and people have to be given the space to breathe. Again, I'm not being specific about anything, but on the internet, if you want to make a mod for Stellaris that's hosted on your own webpage that requires someone put a folder into another folder on their computer to play, that's totally fine, and that's got nothing to do with developers for me.
It's the extent to which it becomes a creative tool. And again, I think when it comes down to IPs, sort of game content stuff, you can say, when you play this game and you use the mod tools, you can't use it to do any of this stuff. And that gives you the legal right to come after it. If someone makes let's say there is like a hate political party or something. If someone makes something in your game to use in a political campaign for that, you can come after them and say, hey, take this down. A big, high-profile media thing. But other than things like that, you're making a creative tool here. That's what modding is. It's a creative tool. It's like a word processor or a DAW for music. It's just a set of tools. So you can't control everything that anyone does with it. The only point I think maybe I do have a slight, maybe not disagreement with you, but different approach. When it's Steam, you're saying that people have to police Steam Workshop stuff, then you have to put some content controls in. You have to have wording that express those content controls. You could do the Apple thing of just saying anything that we think is bad is bad. Sorry, which I don't find satisfactory. I think you do have to start drawing some lines. And even though that's hard, it's something that is your responsibility to do.
Yeah, I'm frustrated that the way the App Store and the way Steam Workshop works, you are required to do that. But I basically do agree that you are, because you're making money from this thing.
Yeah.
It's much more reflective of when you're selling something. Anything that's being sold by you becomes much more attached to you than someone making a racist remark on Twitter. That doesn't feel attached to Twitter. It just the things are clearly different. So the bad situation is the fact that there's no other way of getting apps or sort of content really on the iPhone, but using the App Store, and Apple have a fairly pragmatic, I find it slightly offensive sometimes, but fairly pragmatic approach. And you're right, you probably do have to have a set of rules and then go by them. Although this really complicated stuff, sometimes people get away with stuff like content detrimental to our image, basically giving them the ability
Yeah,
to take down anything
right.
that they want.
Yeah.
Which is fine on the Steam Workshop. Again, I'm just glad that in PC land, the rest of the internet exists so we can get away from these walled gardens.
Right, exactly. And attempting to put any sort of control in that, maybe there's a slight ball drop here in unfortunate phrase, in terms of saying, you can put out a company statement that says we don't like racism, and that might be a sufficient thing to do in this situation.
That'll
just
never
to
shut up the
reiterate
internet,
that.
though. I mean,
It won't shut up the internet, but at least it's something, if you felt like you have to respond to that. But then you're right, you get into all of these individual cases of things where, unlike this, which is blatantly racist nonsense, it's just trolling racist nonsense. It's clear to any reasonable person that's true. Unlike things like this, where there are more borderline cases, you say you can't play whack-a-mole with that and come out with a statement every time anything in any direction is bad. That's not a good use of anyone's time or energy.
yeah, let's just allow people to mod games as tools, and allow companies to ban stuff they find problematic on Steam Workshop, probably on a case-by-case basis.
That's how you have to do it. That's enough from that. We don't have a Magic Corner this week, I believe.
No Magic Corner this week.
No Magic Corner this week. Did we talk about the Magic documentary on the show before? I think maybe we did.
I'm too old, I don't recall
Magic
things like
documentary. Well, just in case we did, I might gloss over that. I watched it. I liked it more than friend of the show, Maciek Strakowski, did. He said he found it depressing, depicted players living with their parents and so on. But I didn't mind that aspect of it. It's interesting. Let's move on from that. Let's talk about Silicon Valley, which is a show that people have been telling me to watch for literally a year. And I haven't found a good method of doing that until I was in HMV, aka Box Set Empire.
Oh my goodness, you bought something on a disc in HMV.
I bought both seasons of Silicon Valley on Blu-ray.
Wow.
Which is really good. It was on sale. And I absolutely love it. It's probably up there with season 1 of Kimmy Schmidt as my favorite modern sitcom.
Great.
It's so good because it's so classically done. It really has a nice range of the classical sort of type of sitcom characters. It has a really interesting but still sympathetic main character. It has extremely funny, minor, bit part, weird characters that are sort of fairly consistently surprising. And it's very authentic. It's very true to its source material. A lot of the things that happen are kind of like things that happen in real life. So it's brilliant, amazing.
Yeah, I'm really glad you like it. I strongly recommended it to you. For me, it's like I just think it's really, really, really well done, and that's why I like it a lot. There are some aspects of its kinds of comedy that aren't necessarily my favorite, but because it's just so well done and so high budget, and it gets to do a lot of sort of satire on an area that we know really well, and it's really ripe for satire and parody. And it's got some really fun actors in it. I really like it.
I think I read a really interesting article recently, which I almost had as a show topic, about Family Guy, and the writer was saying how they used to use the sort of the shock value as a kind of buffer for jokes. So they would do something shocking, but it would be in a direction. And now, as the later seasons have gone on, they kind of, it being shocking is the joke. And that was never how it worked. And the great thing about Silicon Valley, and done by Mike Judge, Beavis and Butthead guy, is that it has the ability to go very crude at times, but it doesn't overuse that. So it just has that weighting. If a joke needs that, it'll go there. But a lot of the time, there's a lot of quite heartfelt and sort of subtle humor in there, as well as all the sort of crass stuff.
Yeah,
so
it can
really
be
has a
pretty
big
crass.
range. Yeah.
I just want to quote a gag from it, of an episode I just watched, where the whole thing was really taking the mickey out of how everyone in California is very happy to smoke weed, but hates smoking. And there's a Chinese character in the funny guy who owns the incubator said, "We don't have the freedoms here in California that you have in China." And I thought that's really good. They've got a lot of different things going on, and I like it.
Yeah, and it negotiates sort of difficult issues generally, I think, pretty well with characters sort of largely speaking up for themselves. I just saw the episode where they get the mural painted on their garage. by the graffiti artist. And there's some really good stuff in that where it sort of leans in a pretty worrying, offensive direction and then kind of leans back, and it slightly plays with the audience's expectations. And that's a really nice way of handling that stuff. Just use a bit of uneasiness. But obviously, you know, my favorite character is the billionaire who funds their company, and just this character who can do anything at any time and is just the most erratic acting person. To have a complete wild card character like that in a sitcom is absolutely brilliant. Yeah, it's great.
It's a winner.
It's a winner. So enough of that, and we move back in time now to the hallowed corridors of 2006, thanks to Eurogamer and producer Jimmy, for the games that were released this week then. And on the 2nd of June 2006, we have Coffee Break on the PC. Now, under the new system, producer Jimmy has provided
This is a
me
Sims
link.
clone.
It is. It is.
Coffee Break is an office life simulation game. You form relationships with your co-workers and your boss and perform various office-related tasks.
I feel like that's not the best understanding of The Sims about why people like. I don't think people were going, you know what this really misses is a kind of realistic office environment. But there you go. That's what that is. Final Fantasy IV on the GBA.
Oh.
Half-Life 2 Episode 1 on the PC, of course, prompting the Eurogamer article there. Yeah, Episode 1, you really hated Episode 1. I remember watching you playing it.
I'm sorry. I love you, Valve, but I really didn't get... Because for me, I mean, I'm such a Half-Life 1 guy, and Half-Life 2 missed out quite a few things that I loved from Half-Life 1. I specifically love it when a game takes place in one coherent location. And I really, really liked that about Half-Life 1. So, and Half-Life 2 just seemed to, Episode 1 seemed to take quite a lot of things that weren't that good from Half-Life 2 and make the whole game about them. But, you know, Episode 2 really shifted it up.
I felt a bit sort of Half-Life 2'd out by the end of Half-Life 2, and I didn't want to play Episode 1, and then I was sort of glad when you showed it to me and it wasn't good. So, yeah, that was where I was at with that. Tourist Trophy, the real riding simulator on PS2, is a motorbike game, and a very uninteresting looking one at that.
Yes, not a game where you go around being a tourist and try and get a trophy for it, unfortunately.
Yes, as appearances may suggest. Zoo Tycoon 2 African Adventure, there's a lot of polygonal wildlife in this. I mean, this doesn't look like a zoo
Is this
to
Andy
me.
Schatz game?
Could well be. It's not. Yes. African
There you go.
Adventure. That's enough of that, and now we catapult ourselves back to the glorious present with the top 10 UK Steam games. I think they took away the worldwide top sellers thing, which I was really enjoying. So
Oh, no.
we're back to the UK now. I'm a bit sad about that. Number 10 is Doom. Yep, I haven't had time to play it. I've been playing too much Overwatch, which we should have probably talked about. Maybe we can talk about it after this. But I haven't played more Doom. Number 9 is Rebel Galaxy at 50% off. What's Rebel Galaxy? Do you know?
No idea.
I don't know. I'm going to look that up. 1 second. Rebel Galaxy. Stealth Google. Here we go. Rebel Galaxy is a space trading and combat simulation video game. Oh, yeah, you see, all you have to do is make a 4X game now. That's literally all you have to do. If you want to make money, just make a 4X game. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt Blood and Wine, the DLC at number 8, very hotly anticipated by fans of The Witcher. I think they've said this is going to be the last one, so they're sort of rounding off that.
They're making a cyberpunk.
Yes,
game.
For which I haven't been asked to do the music.
Oh,
Every
no.
time that happens, I get a little bit sadder. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'm definitely going to get that when that comes out. Counter-Strike Go is number 7. The Stanley Parable at 80% off is number 6. Amazing game.
Yeah, nice
really,
work.
really awesome game. Glad to see it back in the top 10. Go and buy that if you haven't played it. It's really funny. It's just really well written, and it plays around with stuff that you are familiar with from games, and it's just great. Love it. YouTuber's Life at number 5. Now, I've seen this lurking around on Steam. I saw this when it came out. It is it's a sort of life sim game, as you might imagine, about being a YouTuber. And the graphics look very, very simple, but I guess you do YouTuber-y things. You make videos and get into sort of minor trouble with the police.
Yeah,
I
this
would
looks
imagine.
a bit like sort of how The Sims would look now if it was released now. I guess there are just an awful lot of 10 to 15-year-olds who would like to be a YouTuber.
Right, yeah. No, it's great. Aspirational life sim game, always a hit with the kids. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, number 4, understandable. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt Plus Expansion Pass, number 3. Total War Warhammer, number 2. And number 1 is Grand Theft Auto 5, 33% off. You cannot keep that game off the number 1 slot when it goes on discount. Amazingness. Well, that's enough of that. We've got some brief listener questions this week. Cheshire followed up from last time about PayPal. He said PayPal also changed their purchase protection policies when Bitcoin was surging a few years ago. I imagine they analyze their policies the same way insurance companies do. Purchase protection looks good on the marketing flyer, but it gets yanked as soon as there's a chance it'll impact their bottom line. This was about PayPal withdrawing purchase protection from Kickstarter.
Yeah, I thought that was well put by Mr. Cheshire.
Yeah, that is a good point. It is, sort of doing actuarial stuff, I guess, is something PayPal really have to do. They have to be very risk aware. So yeah, good point. And they do seem to be quite reactive to things like that. Thanks, Cheshire. Alex Connolly says, Dear Sirs, as a young bloke cutting my teeth and honing my taste on PC gaming, I found myself besotted with curious, seemingly exclusive titles like the Sango Fighter series and the South Korean top-down mech shmup Full Metal Jacket. I ask you, what are some oddballs from your gaming past that made an impact, however minimal, games rarely, if ever, mentioned or recalled by others? That's a tough question, which we could well have researched in advance.
I think, have one answer for this. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name. There's a fighting game series on the DS. I was really, really, I found in France, a copy in France once. I think I ended up buying the sequel, and I really liked it. It was a bit unusual. I think it took place on 2 planes.
Oh, wow, okay.
But I can't for the life of me remember what it was. It's based on, it's Bleach.
Oh, yeah. Bleach.
I really liked a couple of the Bleach games on the DS, and they felt very exotic and exclusive.
Yeah, that doesn't get talked about very much as a fighting game series, actually. I mean, the anime thing is really well known, but yeah. Doshin the Giant, I think, I remember. Was something that you had on the 64 D&D, and that's the one that, if I mention that, people know it. They go, oh, I remember that game. It was so weird. And weirdly, now I'm on that theme, I thought about Giant Citizen Kabuto, which was another one that sort of I think that ended up completely bankrupting its studio. It wasn't talked about much, but was really unusual.
Yeah, decent game.
I'm trying to think about personal ones for me, really old ones.
I liked Metal Fatigue as well. I don't know how obscure that is.
Yeah.
But that was a really weird, cool RTS.
I remember, this was a bit postmodern, but at university I played Manhunter 2.
Oh, no.
With my friend, and that was just from all of those old Sierra games, you had that kind of Sierra catalog thing, which I talked about before. That was one of those really obscure things that we found, and it's like a weird cross between quite a good adventure game and something terrible. Oh yeah, Mean Streets, that's a good one. The Tex Murphy game, Mean Streets.
Oh right.
Which was, I have talked about this before. It was an adventure game where you had these big, quite nicely rendered VGA sort of 2D rooms where the character could walk around them and do stuff. And then you had interrogation sort of questioning sequences with a big pixelated portrait of a person and a ask me about ... type interface where you type stuff in. And then you had a really weird, actually 3D polygonal flight sim that you used to get between locations, which was really boring. And you had side-scrolling combat. Completely insane game, but very good. I've been watching a Let's Play of that again.
Okay.
Right. There we go. That's the end of your questions. You have to go soon, but I very quickly would like to talk about Overwatch, if you have 5 minutes.
Go ahead. I don't really have 5 minutes, but I'll...
You don't have 5 minutes.
I'll allow it.
Well, I'll continue talking when you leave. So yeah, I didn't like it when I first played it. I found it very confusing and messy, loads of weird character abilities, lots of stuff. And it's just the fact that everyone is playing this game simultaneously. So I've been playing with Malakian HD and a guy that we know called Toby Pinder and his friends who are very tolerant of us. And playing in a group where everyone is communicating and doing the same stuff, it really does work. I'm slightly buying more into the arguments now that it's a refinement of TF2 rather than a stupid bastardization of TF2. But yeah, it's the Hearthstone of TF2. They've made it kind of more accessible, more flashy. They've sort of rounded off some of the weirdness. I just don't think it's a well-designed game. It's so flabby, it's so weird, it's hard to know why stuff happens. There's a lot of, like, characters can just kill everyone with their ultimate ability when that charges, and that makes the person doing that feel good, but it's very low skill. It's a weird game. I don't expect it to hold everyone's interest, but I'm playing a lot of it and having fun. I'm conflicted.
Okay, I mean, I guess we're just going to see them take any sort of successful genre and find a way of Blizzardizing it.
It's
which could be a good thing, could be a bad
it's
thing.
Worked
we'll see.
Again. Yeah, I mean, I really called this game being a failure by Blizzard standards, and I want to see how it retains people. That's like my last bastion of that possibly being true, but I guess they've just done it again. They can't do anything wrong with this approach, the Blizzardization.
Yeah, they know what they're doing.
Yeah, they do. Right, that's the end of that. Thank you very much for joining us once again. I'm Mode7Games on Twitter. He's Ian Hardingham on Twitter, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.